The rain fell hard over the broken streets of Dareth Prime, a dying alien city once full of light, now filled with silence and hunger. The air smelled of rust and wet metal. Small fires burned in barrels where forgotten souls tried to keep warm. Lyra walked through the market with her little daughter in her arms. The child's eyes dull from hunger, her body trembled, wrapped in thin rags that could not stop the cold. Every step Lyra took left muddy footprints on the ground. She had not eaten in 3 days, and her child had eaten even less. The market was full of noise, but no kindness. Alien traders shouted behind broken stalls, selling rotten fruit and cracked bread. Lyra begged, her voice soft and shaking. Please, just a little food for her. But no one listened. They turned away. Some laughed at her, others whispered. She's one of them. Her people had lost everything when the human fleets came. But the war was long over. The humans had left. And now her own kind ruled over the ashes. Crueler than before, Lyra's stomach twisted with pain. She looked at her daughter, the child's lips dry, her breath shallow. The world had taken everything from them, her husband, her home, her pride. Now it wanted her child too. She stopped under a flickering neon sign that read only $1. Her reflection stared back from a puddle, a dirty face, hollow eyes and tangled white hair. She knew what she had to do. She whispered to herself, if my body can feed her, then so be it. She found a trader who dealt in slaves. He sat behind a desk of broken metal. Counting his credits, Lyra bowed her head and said, I wish to sell myself. The trader laughed, a cruel sound. You have nothing worth selling. She pointed to her daughter, standing barefoot beside her. I need food for her. The trader looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. Fine, 1 coin. He shouted for the buyers, and soon a few dark figures gathered around. But none of them looked at her with mercy. Then, from the shadows, a tall figure stepped forward. He was human, wearing a long coat soaked from the rain. His face was calm, his eyes unreadable. He placed a coin on the table. The sound of metal echoed through the silent market. I'll take her, he said quietly. The trader smirked. She's yours? Lyra froze. Fear rising inside her chest, she turned to her daughter. The child clung to her leg, tears mixing with the rain. Lyra knelt and kissed her forehead. Don't be afraid, my little star. You'll live. The human looked at the child, then said, both of you. The trader laughed again. That wasn't the deal. The human's eyes turned cold. His hand moved toward the weapon on his belt. The laughter stopped. The trader raised his hands. Fine, take them both, not worth dying for. Lyra didn't understand what was happening. But the human's voice was steady. Come, he said, and walked away. She hesitated, holding her daughter close. Her bare feet splashed in puddles as she followed him through the rain. They walked in silence, the neon lights fading behind them. Lyra expected chains, cages, orders. Instead, he led her through a narrow street until they reached a small metal house. Its door slid open with a soft hiss, warmth spilled out. Inside was simple, a table, 2 chairs, and a small stove glowing with heat. He handed her a blanket and said, Dry her first. Lyra didn't move. She waited for the command that would come after, but none came. The human knelt beside her daughter, opened a small pack, and gave her a piece of warm bread. The child looked up at him, then at her mother. Lyra's hands shook as she watched her daughter eat. Why? She whispered. The human looked at her with tired eyes. Because no one should sell themselves to live. Lyra lowered her head. Tears fell from her eyes. She had forgotten what kindness felt like. Her body trembled as warmth began to return to her skin. The human introduced himself. Reese, he said softly. I was once a soldier. She did not answer, afraid of the name, of what it meant. Humans were destroyers, monsters in the old stories. Yet here he was, feeding her child, asking for nothing. When night came, Lyra sat in the corner holding her daughter. The human slept by the door, weapon in his hand, guarding them like a silent wall. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. The market would forget her by morning. But for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope, and as her child slept in her arms, Lyra looked at the man who had bought her freedom with a single coin and whispered through the rain, Maybe not all humans are monsters. Lyra woke to the sound of soft rain hitting the metal roof. The room was dim, warm, and smelled of bread for a moment. She thought she was dreaming, her body wrapped in a clean blanket, her daughter asleep beside her, breathing softly. Her eyes moved to the human sitting near the door. He was awake, silent, watching the rain through a narrow window. His weapon rested against the wall, but his posture was calm. He looked more like a tired man than a soldier. When he noticed her gaze, he spoke, his voice deep but gentle. "You're safe here." Lyra didn't answer. She pulled her daughter closer, her instinct screaming that safety was a lie. Humans never saved aliens. Humans conquered, they destroyed, they bought lives. Not to protect them, but to own them. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" The human turned to her, surprised by the question. "Nothing," he said. "You and your daughter can eat. Then rest." He walked to the table, placed 2 plates of warm food, and stepped back. Lyra didn't move. Suspicion wrapped around her like a cold chain. The smell of food filled the air. Real food, not the rotten scraps from the market. Her daughter opened her eyes. Small hands reaching out, Lyra stopped her gently. "Wait," she said. Her heart pounded. She waited for the command, for him to say, "Eat if you obey." But it never came. "Go ahead," he said. "It's for her." The little girl took a small bite, then another, and then she smiled. It was the first time Lyra had seen that smile in months. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for a piece of bread. It was soft, warm, like a memory of a world that no longer existed. She wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. The human watched quietly, his expression unreadable. After a while, he said, "My name is Reese." Lyra didn't reply. She didn't want to know his name. A name made him real, and real meant danger. Reese sighed and looked at the small photo on the table. It showed a human woman and a child, smiling in sunlight. "They're gone," he said quietly. "War took them." Lyra looked up, unsure if he was speaking to her or to himself. He continued, "I was a soldier. I saw what hunger does, what war does. I couldn't walk away when I saw you." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "You bought me." He nodded slowly. "Yes," then added, "but not to own you." The words confused her. "Humans did not own what they bought," she said. "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. He stared at the flickering light above them, then said, "Because I couldn't stand watching another mother beg." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the rain outside and the soft breathing of the child. Lyra didn't understand him. Maybe she never would. But something in his tone didn't sound like pity. It sounded like loss. That night, when her daughter fell asleep, Lyra sat by the wall, eyes open. She had promised herself she would run when he slept. But something inside her hesitated. The warmth, the food, the quiet. It was all too gentle to be a trap. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the laughter of the trader, the jeers of the crowd, and the echo of the coin that sold her life. Near midnight, she heard a soft sound. She turned and froze. Her daughter was not beside her. Panic filled her chest. She looked around and saw Reese sitting near the small stove, the little girl asleep in his arms. He was reading softly from an old data pad, his voice low and calm. Lyra's eyes filled with tears she didn't understand. She had seen humans hold guns, never children. She had seen them burn cities, not protect lives. She stood silently, watching the scene in disbelief. The human's eyes lifted to hers. He didn't move, didn't speak. He only nodded once, as if to say, "She's safe." Lyra sat down slowly, her body shaking. She felt something she hadn't felt since before the war. Trust trying to return. Even if she didn't want it to, hours passed, the rain eased. The night turned quiet. When dawn came, the first light touched the cold metal walls. Reese carefully placed the child back beside her mother. He stood up stretched and said, "You can rest today. Tomorrow I'll show you where the food comes from." Lyra blinked in confusion. "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because one day you shouldn't have to beg anyone again." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then for the first time, she whispered his name, "Reese." He paused, turned and nodded. In that moment, something shifted in the room. Not ownership, not fear, but something fragile and real. Hope began to grow again, quietly, between a human soldier and an alien mother who had sold herself to survive. The morning sun rose weakly through the gray clouds, turning the metal walls of the shelter pale gold. Lyra sat near the door, her daughter still asleep on the cot beside her. The warmth of the night still lingered, but her thoughts were cold. She had not run. Even though she could have, she had stayed. And she did not understand why Reese stepped outside, his boots echoing on the metal floor. When he returned, he carried a small box filled with seeds and old tools. He placed them on the table, then said, "We'll plant food today." Lyra blinked. "You grow food here?" He nodded. "On the outskirts, there's soil mixed with dust and metal. Not much, but enough." Lyra hesitated. "Why do you want me to learn this?" Rhys looked at her for a long moment. "Because one day you shouldn't need anyone to feed you." The words hit her heart like a spark. She followed him outside. The air smelled of rust and wet earth. Beyond the broken fence lay a small garden, green patches struggling to live among ruins. Rhys handed her a small shovel. "Dig here," he said. She obeyed silently. The ground was hard, but the rhythm of digging felt strangely peaceful. Her daughter played nearby, chasing the wind. Lyra smiled faintly for the first time in many days. As they worked, Rhys told her about the old world, how the war had burned cities and poisoned rivers. He spoke not like a victor, but like a man haunted by what he had seen. "I was there when the bombardments ended," he said quietly. "I saw mothers like you searching for their children." Lyra paused. Her hands covered in dirt, she looked up. "And you helped them?" Rhys's face darkened. "No," he said. "Back then, I was too afraid to break orders." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was the silence of understanding. When the sun reached its peak, they rested under a broken roof. Rhys handed her a bottle of clean water. "Drink," he said. She took it carefully. "You don't have to be kind," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't. But I want to be." Her heart ached with confusion. Her whole life had been built on pain, debt, and survival. She did not know what to do with kindness. Days passed like this every morning. They worked. Every night they shared food. Rhys taught her to fix the water pump, to build small traps for animals, and to repair broken walls. Lyra's daughter began to laugh again. Her small voice filled the quiet house. Sometimes she would bring Rhys small flowers she found between the stones. He always smiled and placed them in a cup beside the table. But peace in Dareth Prime never lasted long. One afternoon, while returning from the garden, Lyra noticed 3 alien men standing near the road. Their uniforms marked them as enforcers, soldiers of the new regime that ruled the city. They watched her closely, whispering among themselves. One of them smirked. "A human pet," he said loud enough for her to hear. Lyra froze, clutching her daughter's hand. She lowered her gaze and walked faster. Her heart pounded when she reached the house. Rhys saw her face and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing," she said too quickly, but her trembling hands told the truth. Rhys's jaw tightened. "Who?" She shook her head. "Don't, please, they are enforcers." That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She sat near the stove. Staring at the flickering light, Rhys sat beside her silently. "They will come," she whispered. "They will take her." "Maybe me too." Rhys looked at her, his eyes steady. "Then they'll have to go through me first." She turned toward him, confused. "Why risk yourself?" "You owe us nothing." He gave a tired smile. "Maybe not, but you said once that I bought you, right?" She nodded slowly. "Then let's say I bought your freedom," he said softly. "And I don't plan to give it back." Her eyes widened. She didn't know whether to cry or smile. The words sounded strange but powerful. The rain started again, tapping softly against the roof. Her daughter stirred in her sleep, and Lyra whispered. "You shouldn't fight for me," Rhys replied quietly. "I've fought for worse reasons, for the first time." She believed him when the night deepened. Lyra looked at the man sitting across from her, the human who once was her captor, and now her protector. Her heart whispered something she was too afraid to say out loud. That maybe, just maybe, she was not surviving anymore, but living but outside in the shadows. The enforcers watched the small house, their cold eyes glowing in the rain. They had seen enough. Tomorrow they would come for her. The storm returned with thunder that night, lightning flashing through the cracks in the walls. The small home that had felt safe for weeks now seemed to tremble with unease. Lyra could not sleep. Her instincts screamed that something was coming. Rhys sat near the door, his weapon across his lap. He didn't speak, didn't move, but his eyes stayed sharp in the dark. He had the look of a man who had seen too many battles and trusted peace too little. When dawn came, the air was heavy. The streets outside were quiet, too quiet. Even the stray drones that hovered above the ruined rooftops were gone. Lyra was feeding her daughter when the knock came, a slow, heavy pounding on the metal door. Rhys stood instantly, his hand tightening on his weapon. He opened the small viewing slit and saw 3 alien enforcers in gray armor, standing in the rain. Their leader, tall and cruel-eyed, shouted, "By city order, the alien female known as Lyra is under arrest." Lyra froze, her hands shaking. She whispered, "They found us." Reese's voice stayed calm. "On what charge?" The enforcer sneered. "Consorting with a human? Living outside assigned zones. Disobedience to species law." Reese opened the door halfway, the rain spilling in. "She's under my protection," he said. His tone flat. "Dangerous." The enforcer laughed. "A human protecting alien property? That's rich." Lyra stepped forward, her daughter clinging to her leg. "Please," she said. "We've done nothing wrong." The enforcer's expression turned colder. "Your kind doesn't speak to me," he said. Raising his hand, Reese moved before he could strike. His weapon was drawn, the barrel pointed at the enforcer's chest. "You'll turn around and walk away," he said, voice steady like iron. The soldiers behind the leader aimed their rifles. The air filled with the hiss of charging plasma. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Rain dripped from Reese's coat, from Lyra's hair, from the barrel of his gun. Then the leader smiled darkly. "You think one human can stop us?" Reese didn't answer. He fired. The blast hit the soldier's weapon, sending sparks and smoke across the doorway. Chaos broke loose. The second enforcer shouted and shot back. A beam scorched the wall beside Lyra's head. She screamed and fell to the ground, shielding her child. Reese dove to the side, firing again. The confined space filled with flashes of blue and red light. Each shot echoed like thunder. "Run!" Reese shouted, but Lyra didn't move. She crawled toward her daughter, wrapping her arms around her. The sound of battle shook the air. The smell of burning metal filling the room. Reese charged forward, using his shoulder to slam into one of the enforcers. They fell together, wrestling in the mud outside. Reese's fist met armor, blood mixed with rain. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Inside, the leader raised his rifle again. Aiming at Lyra, she looked up, eyes wide, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. All her fear, all her pain turned into something fierce. She grabbed the fallen enforcer's weapon from the floor, her hands shaking, and pulled the trigger. The shot hit the leader in the shoulder. He screamed, falling backward. The room went silent except for the rain. Reese staggered inside, breathing hard, his coat torn. His face bleeding, he saw Lyra standing there. Holding the weapon with both trembling hands, the child sobbed quietly in her arms. He walked over and gently took the gun from her. "It's over," he said, his voice rough. She looked around at the broken walls. The smoke, the blood. "No," she whispered. "It's never over." Outside, the surviving enforcer limped away into the rain. Clutching his radio, "They'll bring more," Lyra said. Her voice cracking, Reese nodded slowly. "Then we run." He moved quickly, packing food, tools, and weapons. Lyra wrapped her daughter in a blanket, the child's small face buried in her shoulder. As they stepped out into the storm, lightning flashed across the ruins. In the distance, alarms began to wail. They moved through the broken streets, staying in the shadows. Lyra's legs ached, but she didn't stop. Reese kept his weapon ready, scanning every alley. After an hour, they reached the edge of the city, where twisted towers gave way to open wasteland. Lyra stopped, panting. "Where will we go?" Reese looked out at the horizon. The clouds glowed faintly with the first light of dawn. "There's an old outpost beyond the hills," he said. "If we reach it, we can disappear." Lyra looked at him. "Why do you keep saving me?" He met her eyes, his voice quiet. "Because I couldn't save the ones I lost." Her chest tightened. She didn't know what to say, so she just whispered, "Then let me save you this time." He gave a tired smile. "Deal." They walked on, the city fading behind them. The rain slowly stopped, replaced by the cold whisper of the wind. Far away, a flare shot into the sky to signal. The enforcers were coming. Lyra looked back once, her heart pounding. The life she had known, the chains, the fear, all of it lay behind her. Now ahead, only uncertainty waited, but for the first time, she didn't feel owned. She didn't feel weak. She felt alive, and beside her, the human who had bought her life once now fought for it. Bleeding, limping, but unbroken, as they disappeared into the wasteland. The storm rolled away behind them, carrying the echoes of their defiance. The morning after the storm was silent. The city of Dareth Prime lay far behind them, a black smudge under the gray sky. The wind carried dust and the faint echo of sirens, but out here among the hills, there was only quiet. Lyra walked beside Reese, her daughter held close against her chest. The little one slept, Her tiny hands gripping her mother's clothes, Reese limped beside them, his coat torn. Blood dried on his arm, but his eyes stayed fixed ahead. They reached a ridge overlooking the wasteland. The horizon glowed faintly with the first rays of dawn. Reese pointed toward a cluster of broken towers in the distance. "Old outpost," he said. "We can rest there." Lyra nodded weakly, her legs aching. She had no strength left to speak. Only the thought of safety kept her moving. By the time they reached the outpost, the sun had climbed higher. The building was half buried in sand, its walls cracked and covered in vines. Reese pushed the door open and the smell of old dust filled the air. He searched the corners carefully, checking for traps or sensors. When he was sure it was safe, he said softly, "We'll stay here for a while." Lyra laid her daughter on a bed made of old blankets. The child stirred and smiled in her sleep. For the first time in days, Lyra allowed herself to breathe. Reese sat against the wall, his body heavy with exhaustion. His wound was worse than he admitted. Blood seeped slowly through the bandages. Lyra knelt beside him. "You're hurt," he smiled faintly. "It's nothing," she frowned. "You fought for me. You bled for me." "Don't tell me it's nothing." He met her gaze. His voice soft. "I told you before I couldn't save my family. Maybe saving you is how I make peace with that." Her throat tightened. "And if you die?" Reese looked out the window at the sunlight. "Then I'll die knowing you and your child are free." The word free felt strange on her tongue. For so long, freedom had been a dream, an impossible word spoken by the dead. Now it was here, sitting beside her in the form of a wounded human who had bought her with a coin and given her everything back. She tore a piece of her sleeve and began cleaning his wound. Her hands moved gently, her eyes steady. "You're a terrible liar," she whispered. "This is not nothing," he chuckled weakly. "You're getting brave," she smiled faintly. "You taught me that." As the day passed, they found old supplies, dried food, clean water, a small energy cell to power the lights. The child played in the corner, laughing softly. Her laughter echoed through the ruins like a song. But peace was fragile. As evening came, Lyra saw movement far beyond the ridge. 3 dark specks moving slowly through the dust. She felt her heart freeze. "Reese," she whispered. "They're coming." He stood, eyes narrowing. "They tracked us." Lyra held her daughter close. "We can run," she said. Reese shook his head. "They'll follow." "This ends here." He checked his weapon, loaded the last power cell, and stood in the doorway. "No more running." Lyra wanted to stop him, but the look in his eyes told her she couldn't. He wasn't fighting for war. He was fighting for peace, hers, not his. The enforcers appeared through the storm, their armor glinting in the dying light. Reese fired first. The sound tore through the air. A beam hit one of the soldiers, sending him crashing into the sand. The others returned fire. Lyra hid her daughter behind the wall, the child crying softly. She looked back at Reese, his silhouette framed against the sunset, brave and broken and beautiful. Then one of the beams struck him in the chest. Lyra screamed, running to him. She dragged him back inside, blood staining the floor. The last enforcer fell moments later, burned by his final shot. Silence returned, heavy and endless. Reese gasped for breath, his hand gripping hers tightly. "You're safe now," he whispered. Tears streamed down her face. "Don't you dare leave us," he smiled faintly. "You don't need me anymore." Lyra shook her head. "We do." He reached up, brushing her cheek with trembling fingers. "You gave me something I lost long ago," she whispered. "What?" He smiled, eyes closing slowly. "Family." The word broke her heart. She held him as his breathing slowed. The wind howling softly outside. Hours passed. The storm faded. The sky turned clear. Lyra sat beside him, silent, holding his hand until it went cold. When dawn rose again, she buried him on the ridge. Facing the rising sun, her daughter placed a small wildflower on the mound. Lyra whispered, "You bought me once, but you freed me forever." She looked at the horizon, then at her child. "We live for him now." The girl nodded, smiling through her tears as they walked away from the grave. The wind carried the scent of rain and hope. The world was still broken, the war still left scars, but something had changed. A human's kindness had rewritten the meaning of freedom, and somewhere beyond stars and ashes, Reese's name would live on, not as a soldier, not as a buyer, but as the man who chose love over chains.